This is a quick video for POSC 3600, talking about the take-home exam and serving as a bit of a review. So the exam is scheduled to be due April 14th at 9 a.m. If you can get it in by that time, that's perfect. If not, just let me know. You're going to submit it online in Blackboard, just the same as you've done for your essays and other assignments. It will go through Turnitin, as usual, and yeah. So for this one, unlike the essay, you can only submit it once, so you're not going to get. So just submit it once, and it'll be done. Okay. You're going to complete 3 questions, writing in full sentences with correct grammar, sentence structure, spelling, etc., etc. You're going to use citations and references following APA formatting, and you're, like I said, expected to answer 3 questions. All the questions are of equal value, so they're not weighted any differently, and each question should be about 750 words to 1,000 words in length. The exam is worth 20% of your final grade, and please submit it all the answers to the questions in one single file. One of the main things that I really want you to focus on, or not focus on, but make sure that you do, is to avoid using the same information in more than one answer. Because what I want you to be able to do is to demonstrate a wide range of course content. Remember that your answers have to refer to course materials, so articles, documents, videos, class discussions, as well as any research for your essay. You're going to cite and reference everything, but you do not do extra research outside the course materials. You should be able to answer everything just using the course materials. Do not use direct quotations, and do put everything into your own words and provide the citations. Double space your answers, put your name on the exam as well as in the file name, and make sure to indicate which question you're answering by its question number. And as I already said, draw widely on your course materials. I really want to hear your breadth of knowledge, okay? It's not like there's a right or wrong answer for all of these questions. It's demonstrating your knowledge and ability to analyze and think critically in those sorts of things. So here's one question. So it's a question on the nature of educational institutions. So it says, schools are both ever-changing organizations and rather inert institutions. Since they're ultimately regulated by government bodies, public schools must respond to many political initiatives and reforms in one direction reforms in one direction can trigger reactions in the opposite direction. So this is where the idea comes in that schools may be changing, but they're also don't change a whole lot. So discuss what Davies and Guppy mean by this statement. And what you can do is you can think about the challenges that are faced by schools and universities, any of the public school institutions, as they deal with rapidly changing social norms, legal rulings, national and global events. So, for example, you might think about the gay straight alliances and the fact that they may be good in schools for students, but there's always been some pushback on whether they should be allowed in schools or not from certain groups in society. You could think about freedom of speech controversies, particularly in the university setting. Think about how do we teach about Indigenous protests and rights, the legal rulings regarding Indigenous rights and the Truth for Reconciliation calls to action include some statements about what should be involved in the curriculum for the schools. And then, you get a government that comes into power, such as the current Ford government, who immediately backtracked on creating curriculum regarding these issues on Indigenous rights and the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. You think about climate change and environmentalism, and if you're obsessing about the pandemic right now, maybe you can analyze how the global pandemic is going to impact the nature of education as we go forward. So you could use information from this week, the article by Hess on education research, and think about why is research-based policy important here. Now, in past years, when I've taught this course, I've usually ended the term by thinking about some of the things about what governments are doing, how they're handling education in terms of budget or policy changings or something. There's always something happening. This year, of course, we probably would have been talking about the teachers' collective agreement. I've heard that there is one, they've settled, but the teachers at least haven't voted on it. They haven't seen the terms yet. So under normal circumstances, we'd be focusing on, the nuances of education policy and the what's happening in the current events. And as the Hess article suggests, education policy based on research is important, but we need to take this nuanced approach to understanding the impact of the research, what happens after policies based on the research have been put in place, and so on. So Hess is talking about the importance of understanding policies based on research, and the fact that sometimes policies introduced and they have different impacts than what you expect. So you have to look critically and reevaluate the policies that are being put in place, even if they are based on research. One of the things about education policy, of course, is that people, especially children, regularly do the unexpected, which can turn your best laid plans upside down. At the same time, policies are rarely precise and they're not implemented in controlled settings. In terms of, thinking about how do we talk about education today, I think the top of mind, of course, is the pandemic. So we can be thinking about how is that going to change the way in which we view education. And here we can think about this, the Doreen Massey article that was introduced in week 2 with the question of consumerist model. Does the consumerist model shape education? How does it shape education? And so today, of course, we can ask, how is that going to change with the new normal? And so we started the term by asking this question of what education is, what its purpose is, and we talked about the importance of these words in Doreen Massey's article. We also talked about some key sociological theories that have been applied to education, so Marx, Durkheim, Weber, and so on. We talked about some contemporary theories such as structural functionalism, neo-Marxism, human capital theory, and so on. And we read about the ecology metaphor in the Weaver-Hightower article. And in that article, they argue that the rationalist approaches are inadequate. So you can think about what the argument is in that article and how it might apply to this question. We also, in week 3, we also did a historical overview of some schools and policies, talking about the different types of schools, some demographics. And we talked a bit about some historical theories of the role of education, such as mental discipline, the promotion of good character, good could be in quotation marks there, and where these ideas resurfaced in 21st century policies, such as character education policies. And we talked about a few of the historical acts just to try to provide some context. So, you could use any of these, the articles and the discussions from any of these weeks to answer that question about the structure of schools. There is a question on equity as well. This is something we talked a lot about in our various discussions. And so with this, I'm not going to read the question out loud this time, but this is one of the questions. It is question number 2 on the question sheet, about the idea that issues of equity have been an important part of educational policy over the past 30 years. And there's a few examples that I've got listed there: Indigenous studies, Afrocentric schools, girls-only programs, heritage language programs, and so on, that have all been implemented to address concerns about the lack of diversity in school programming. So you can think about the readings that we did on equity and how they fit with the neoliberal or globalizing trends in education. And again, draw broadly on course materials, thinking about are there effective equity policies in place, what could or should be improved, and so on. And so week 4, we talked about structure and stratification, and in this week we talked about what values should be shaping our education system and how are they embedded into policy and practice. And we used, or we looked at a video called Dare to Care to think about this idea of values that are embedded in our education system. We did talk about the historical perspective, about the different styles of education, the values that were reflected. And so one example was the Lancaster monitorial system, which is the one where the main teacher would teach some older students who would then go and teach the younger students and so on. We talked a bit about some of the theories that shaped how children are seen in society and schools, such as social Darwinism, Piaget, Binet, and then we also talked about some post-war changes. Week 7, we also talked about issues of equity, access, and success, focusing on critical race theory and multicultural policy. And then in week 10, we talked about the socialization role of schools. So looking at the case of schools for Indigenous children, where we talked a little bit about Foucault and the idea of social engineering, looking at a historical perspective on schools for an education for Indigenous children, including the pre-contact era and how children would traditionally have been taught. And we talked about some various acts and reports, such as the Indian Act, the Davin Report, and there's a few royal commissions as well. So I'll pause here just to break up the video so that it's not too